Your cake is not drying out. I know it feel like it is, but you bake something on Sunday. It's perfect, tender, you're delighted with yourself. And by Tuesday morning, it's got that, the texture. It got tight, slightly chalky, coats the roof of your mouth, and you think to yourself, it dried out, it lost its moisture, I should have wrapped it better. So here's a thing you can test yourself tonight. Bake a cake, cool it, weigh it, seal it in a bag properly airtight, weigh it again in 2 days. It will be the same cake, it will have lost essentially no water at all, and it will still be stale. So, the water didn't leave, which means the thing we've all been blaming this on for our entire baking lives is not quite correct. The water is still in there, it's just stopped doing its job. Hi, I'm Dav. 10 years in 5-star hotel pastry sections, a degree in food science and nutrition, and since 2020 almost entirely vegan patisserie, which is where this particular problem gets loud enough that you can't ignore it. But to be clear, this isn't a vegan only thing. Every cake on earth goes stale. But when you take out the eggs and the dairy, you also take out three things that were fighting staling on your behalf, and nobody mentions that anywhere. So today, what's actually happening, why it hits harder without eggs, and a handful of things that can help you fix it. The idea you need is called water activity. And it's one of those things that sounds like laboratory concept until it clicks. And then you see it everywhere. Every food has a certain amount of water in it. That's moisture content. Water activity asks a completely different question. So it asks how much of water is actually free? Think of a room full of people at a party. Moisture content is how many people are in the room. Water activity is how many of them are standing by the door with their coats on, ready to leave. Same number of people, but a completely different party. And you can have two cakes with identical moisture content where one of them is a room full of people deep in conversation, sat down and not going anywhere. And the other one is a room where everybody's got one hand on a door handle. It's a scale from 0 to 1. Pure water is 1. Everyone's leaving. A fresh cake sits around 0.9. Jam is about 0.75. Honey, roughly 0.6. A hard caramel, though, down near 0.3. Below about 0.6, bacteria and mold cannot grow because they cannot drink water that's already spoken for. That's why jam shelf life is so long and fresh fruit goes bad within days. In a jam, there's nothing available to drink. So what makes water unavailable? Well, sugar mostly. When sugar dissolves, every molecule wraps itself in a little jacket of water, and water is now busy. It cannot evaporate as easily, it cannot wander into biscuit base, and nothing can live off it. You've watched this happen and probably not thought about it. Sugar and strawberries, for example, 10 minutes later there's a pool of juice in the bowl. The sugar didn't dry the fruit out, it pulled the water over to itself. Sugars come in different sizes. Table sugar is one big molecule. Invert sugar, glucose syrup, golden syrup, those are made of smaller ones. So gram for gram, you're getting more molecules in there. More molecules means more little jackets, which means more water held, which also means swap portion of sugar in your cake for an inverted sugar, and that cake holds its moisture noticeably longer. And that is not just a home baking hack. That is a standard practice in every bakery producing anything that has to sit in a display case and still be worth buying at 4 in the afternoon. I'm not going to give you a number because it generally depends on your recipe. Inverted sugars are sweeter, they're brown faster, they soften the crumb. If you swap too much, you basically make a completely different cake. So, bake it twice. Once your usual way, once with a modest portion swapped, and taste them side by side on day 2, not day 1. Because day 1 everything is fine and it can be a bit misleading. Okay, now I have to correct something I implied at the start. Because staling is actually two things happening at once. and we constantly blame the wrong one. The first is water leaving or moving around. That's the obvious one and it's real, but it's the smaller half. The second is starch, and that's where most of the damage is. When you bake, starch granules soak up water, swell, and burst. The starch inside unpacks and spreads out into a loose, soft, disorganized mess and meshes your crumb. That mesh is what soft means, but it doesn't want to stay like that. Over hours and days, those molecules slowly find each other again and pull themselves into tight little crystals. And as they tighten, they squeeze water out the structure. That water doesn't go anywhere. It's still in the bag. It's just no longer part of the soft bit. That's why sealed cake still stales. The water stayed, but the structure left. Crystallizing happens fastest just above freezing, which is precisely fridge temperature. The fridge is the single fastest way to stale a cake. Room temperature is lower, and the freezer, when properly wrapped, basically stops it dead because it's too cold for the starch to reorganize at all. And heat undoes it. Warm a stale slice, 10 seconds in a microwave, a few minutes in a low oven, and those crystals melt back out. Not all of it comes back, but most of it does, and it's a different piece of cake. That's the same reason a day-old loaf comes back to life in the oven. And it was never really about the water. Egg white is about 90% water, which sounds like it should make things worse, but when you bake it, those proteins unravel and link into a net and they lock that water into the structure. It's water that's been given a job. A plant milk is also mostly water but has a fraction of the protein, and much of that it does have, it doesn't set the same way. So that water turns up free and it stays free. Yolk is full of lecithin, which is an emulsifier, and emulsifiers do something quietly brilliant. They get in among the starch and physically slow down its ability to pull itself back into crystals. So every yolk in a classic cake recipe was running an anti-staling program in the background. When you take the yolks out, that program stops. Butter at room temperature is soft. It coats the starch, stays plastic, keeps the crumb tender. Coconut oil is solid below about 24 degrees, and this one is important because it's the most common false alarm I see. Sometimes your cake isn't stale and it's just cold. Test it before you write it off. Leave a slice at room temperature for an hour. If it comes back soft and moist, means it was never staling. It was coconut oil setting solid. Completely different problem and a much easier one, to be honest. So practically, when I want something to still be good on day 3, the inverted sugar swap we have covered. Pick a single lever, costs nothing to do that first. Then use some liquid oil rather than only solid coconut fat. Oil cannot crystallize at room temperature, so it keeps the crumb soft in a way a hard fat simply cannot. You don't have to go all the way. Even part of the fat as oil is a real difference. You will trade a bit of structure for it, so again, test and do not just take my word for it. Put an emulsifier back in. You can buy sunflower or soy lecithin and it works perfectly well, but honestly, a spoon of tahini or smooth nut butter brings fat and emulsifying protein together in a form that also tastes like something. But that is if you want a specific flavor in your recipe, of course. Bring nut flour. Ground almonds aren't just flavor and fat. They dilute how much starch is in the crumb. To begin with, less starch, less crystallizing, less staling. The math is quite boring and quite reliable, to be honest. Also, the starch you're binding with could make a difference. Starch contains two kinds of molecule, and one of them, the long straight chain, is the one that crystallizes fast and hard. Corn flour has a lot of it. Tapioca and potato starch have less. So if you're binding something that needs to stay soft for days, corn flour is quietly working against you. If you want a clean, firm set you're serving the same day, corn flour is fine. It's doing what you asked. And soak your sponges. Every professional kitchen does this and almost nobody does it at home. But soak with syrup and not water. If you brush plain water onto a sponge, you have just added a load of completely free water. Sky-high water activity. It will feel wonderful for about 4 hours and then it will become soggy, and by day 3 something's growing in it. Syrup adds moisture that's already tied up. It goes in, it stays put, and it doesn't feed anything. It's actually same wetness but completely different behavior. That's water activity in one sentence, really. One last thing, because once you know about this, you can't stop seeing it. Water always moves from the wetter things to the drier things. Always. It doesn't ask permission and it doesn't wait for service. So the crisp base under your mousse, the sablé under your ganache, every one of those is a slow negotiation that the wet component is going to win, which is why we waterproof. A thin brush of cacao butter or tempered chocolate inside the tart shell before it's filled is a physical barrier that water cannot cross. 10 seconds of work and it buys you a day. Bake your bases a shade darker than feels comfortable as well. Less moisture in the base means it starts the fight in better shape. And finally, assemble late. Anything crisp goes on at the last possible moment. If you're thawing a frozen entremet, the crisp element should meet it at the end and not sit in the freezer with it. Now let's talk about storage and let's run through it quickly. Cool it, then wrap it straight away. You want to catch that last bit of residual moisture before it wanders off, not while it's hot, or you will get condensation and you're simply bought yourself a different problem. At room temperature, airtight, keep for a couple of days. Freeze it if it's longer. Wrapped properly, cake freezes beautifully because you've stopped the starch reorganizing at all, and thaw it while still wrapped so the condensation forms on the film instead of on your cake. And avoid the fridge unless something in it genuinely needs to be cold for safety, in which case, of course, fine. Food safety wins every time, but don't get it out and let it come back to room temperature before anybody eats it. So, if you've got a stale cake in the kitchen right now, go and warm a slice for 10 seconds. Genuinely, half the time it's going to be completely fine. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.